not enough people have mentally thought through the pre-play game of the multiple of attack vectors that will befall you, and many of them will be simultaneously orchestrated to keep you in a state of absolute confusion, stimulus, fear, and lowest energy level, so that you make the typical stampeding sheep critical mistake, like lemmings off the cliff. And my goal and game in life is to tell you that that's going to happen, to get you to pre-plan for it, to think it through, and to have all the aspects that you require in your reset for surviving that attack vector. I want to get you over the other side. And the golden arch on the financial and your balance sheet and net worth, so that you can carry something over, is gold.
And good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for spending your valuable time right here with the Adapt 2030 channel. As always, I try to bring you the brightest minds that are trying to figure out to not only the problem that we have today, but the solutions to move through these. Seems that they're cyclical. If we go back from the Roman era up to today, it seems that there's these cycles that enter and then exit and then enter and exit. And they're always revolved around food, economy, population migration, and the way that governments oversee citizens. And we see that trajectory through time here. And we're at it again. We're at another pivotal cycle juncture. So I have with me today Francis Hunt from The Market Sniper, and you can check out the work there, themarketsniper.com, method, mindset, and market. And during this time, the mindset's going to be really one of the most important things. You're either going to lose it or you're going to shift and pivot on a dime, and using your mind to know that you can continue to move through this versus getting stuck in that corner out of fear. That's going to be one of the most important things. Now, Francis was asking, put a call out there. What are we overlooking in this? And can we really explain why the reset's occurring now? So I reached out and I said, hey, I have this ozone depletion event thing, grand solar minimum, low solar activity affecting crop yields. And it seems like everything's pointing to food now with it is John Kerry saying that we need to reduce American farms because of nitrogen and CO2. What they did with the Dutch farmers, it's not going to stop. It's not. So how do we now move through this, knowing that they may confiscate gold and silver? How does the CBDC play in if you can't pay your property taxes? How's wealth going to be extracted and moved from one part of the globe to the other? Seems like the West is being firewalled off. And to talk about it today, Francis Hunt, I appreciate you coming on. And we talked a little bit before we got on the interview here, this engineered financial crisis. Like, how does, just come at it from a super simple wide view here. Engineered financial crisis, you can see it happening clear as day. So how does one protect oneself here as food prices continue to rise and everything else along with it, interest rates and just daily prices come into this really hyperinflationary, or maybe hyperinflation is the wrong word to use. I'm thinking more Venezuela, Zimbabwe type, but elevated inflation rates for everything that you can buy, consume in your life. And I'll leave it there. Thanks for joining me.
Well, firstly, great to be with you. And yeah, that's a great intro. And there's a lot of things. So when sorting out, rationality is the best tool to retain. And with regards to, you also made mention of maintaining mindset. I'm going to actually, then right at the beginning, I'm going to deal with some dark things and I'm going to come to pretty dark conclusions. My goal is not to down everybody out. In fact, the process of taking action and acknowledging the fullness of a potential situation is itself very elevating for mood. So it is a psychological game. It is an attack vector on every front, in my opinion, that you're going to be facing.
Hey, friends. I notice I'm having more energy and mental focus when I take C60 EVO. Their C60 EVO organic olive oil is delicious. I take it on a spoon in the morning. Sometimes I also put their MCT coconut oil in my coffee. Gives my morning a good boost. My pets love C60 EVO oils too. The face and lip serums are potent products that really work. Check out the testimonials on their website. Invest in yourself, your pets, and those you love with C60 EVO because you're worth it. Feel focused, energetic, and rested today. C60evo.com/adapt2030. You're going to enjoy discounts on bundled items and monthly subscriptions. Use the promo code ADAPT2030 at checkout to take an additional 10% off your order. That's c60evo.com/adapt2030. And now on with the video.
And when you want to take something down, you prepare for a while, and then, if you think of a castle under siege, you're hurling rocks over the walls, you're sending fire arrows into the wood, you're throwing soldiers at the gates, you attack it every way you can, and military is the same. You drop bombs, you shoot shells, you have foot soldiers on the ground. So the whole thing is overwhelming. The goal for the aggressor is to overwhelm you at every level. The goal for the defender, which is us, who are under attack, if you have come to that conclusion, is to not be overwhelmed, to take very steady, mature, rational. We have a lot of things in our favor. We have a lot of people that face this threat. We have the ability to build community. We have the ability to build moats, walls, and defenses that can frustrate extensively. And we have the ability to stockpile. So by seeing what's coming, it's far better to acknowledge and prepare than to ostrich your way through this with your head in the ground. So first of all, I hope not to bum you out, and I want to just refer you back to that opening comment, in that by networking, becoming the people we used to always be, village community members that knew people before we had our soul taken out of us, put in massive high-stacked urban environments where we didn't know anybody's name, walking on a mass street, and you're in a city of millions and lonely as hell. So actually, we're being returned to our roots, and that's a good thing. This is the compulsion. So the long picture of it is actually returning to your strength of connection. So I want to positively veil that. So the attack vectors. The attack vectors are going to be psychological. We're seeing this with the cultural inversion. They create outrage. This is a cultural war that is being funded by a select group of people that are pushing it. This is to frustrate you. This is to help perpetuate that cycles are inherent and every society has to decline. That's actually a falsehood. There is a thread that runs through all of these, and these are manufactured. There's nothing stopping you from having 1,000 years of amazing peace if you didn't have this parasitic element that are enforcing cycles and entrenching and ratcheting up their level of power and dominance over you with each successive cycle. The concern I have for this particular iteration of our cycle is that this is almost the final one, because they have the tools, the technology, the automation to no longer need the labor in the scale that they need. So serfs, peasants always still represented labor. They toiled farms. At least you were viewed coldly as at least a taxation stream and a certain amount of wheat being plowed, a certain amount of harvesting. If you killed all your labor as a landlord, you ended up having to, grow your own food. And that's not their goal. It's a leisure class. This, as you mentioned, I refer to it as the opulent classes and the peasantry. We are going to go very binary in terms of wealth. Everything the central banking cartel has done has absolutely hollowed out the Gini curve. I recently looked on their own official statistics, which I perpetuate is a lie. We don't know the true wealth of the big family names that I don't care to mention, might damage your YouTube, but most of you will know and be saying them as I speak. Their wealth is almost unquantified. But even on official statistics, the bottom 50% own less than 3% of the wealth of the country in the States. The top 90% don't barely get 60%. So the top 10 have literally going towards half. In fact, I think I might have inverted that. They might have 60%. My apologies. It's been a while since I looked at it. And it's expanding much further. And those statistics are already a lie. When you know, so to coin a great phrase of an American writer that many respected, The 7 Effective Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, when you start with the end in mind, you then work back for each of the milestones that you must achieve for achieving something. In the same sense, they And as I say, you can ask if we want to drill down on who they are separately. I won't get into that now. But they have had a plan with an end in mind. If you understand their end in mind, then you understand what they are aiming to do and where you will be attacked. And my overall simplistic take, because I'm already, it's a long form answer already, is that they are looking for what I would describe as a Bolshevik-based communism of a complete ruling class of opulence, and then a equal, in other words, leveled, you will own nothing, serfdom class, which will be maintained at a significantly lower level than is required, given that they are already reaching a point where automation, AI, and robotics could now replace a large amount of human-based labor. And even in the office jobs, coding, there's code generation, there's a lot of developments. And remember, the technology you get to access is probably a generation or two, at least possibly three, on what they currently have access to. So let me leave that as first response, and you can choose where you'd like me to drill down further.
Well, that'd be based currently on 8 billion people, but it seems like the fast track here, specifically talking about milestones, is a greatly reduced population. Now, not talking about the whole, well, I've been to the Georgia Guidestone, so it's written in stone literally. But if we're looking at solar activity and solar cycles and inbound magnetic field anomalies, that goes on with this expedited, ramped up milestones. Now, when I was following this in the beginning, around 2013, 14, I knew that we were coming into some sort of magnetic anomaly. Now, for those of you who haven't heard it before, in October of 2024, the four gas giants are going to line up in the outer solar system, and from the Earth, they're going to be perceived as a square from the Earth. Now, our sun is going to step down a little bit more magnetically. The electromagnetic field of our planet's affected, and that's why the cloud cells and jet streams are moving into different locations. But as the Earth swings through this double magnetic field in our solar system, the last time that the square was observed from our planet out in the outer solar system at this exact degree was 79 AD. So now we're starting to look at a 2,000-year cycle. So I'm thinking, all right, well, why is everything being sped up? Because pre-COVID, some things were changing, and you could see sort of the drip in of economic change, societal change, and it was sort of slow drip. But now it's full faucet, fire hose at 100%, and they just don't care anymore. And when I say them, I'm talking about the central bank and the elite, the power brokers, the governments, the militaries. They just don't care anymore. It's something's coming up so significant that will change society itself that they're all brakes or all gas, no brakes on this one. And I just can only look at it from something so earth-shaking that humanity will no longer have a contract of any way, shape, sort, or form, that whatever's coming, that this magnetic field anomaly and the crop losses that will occur with it, that hungry people storm castles. That can't be controlled. Anything else can be, because they know the impetus or what the stimulus is and how the human's going to respond on that. But you put hunger into it and famine and starvation, then most of the models don't work anymore. The human brain just goes into this default mode. So there's something between, in my opinion, related with the food, the crop losses, the non-availability of foods, the lack of food choices, the breakdown in complex systems that can get food to people, all between now and the next year and a half. So the timelines and the milestones are something incredibly important to look at in terms of when you might think, massive food crop losses are inbound. Like this year, we're going to start to see this ozone depletion event, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But how do you see these milestones built in? And what's this rush that suddenly they're all on? It's all out in the open. Nobody cares anymore. It's just like the resistance is there for people pushing back. But so people are so distracted. It's an overwhelm of the senses. Like you say, it's a blitzkrieg of the mind that people can barely even move. It's the next biggest story that would have stayed around for 6 months in a previous news cycle 20 years ago. But that's happening on a daily. So, what's this sped up with the milestones, and how do you think that mixes in with the economy and the extraction and movement of wealth from one point to another during the depopulation event here?
First of all, when it comes to the climatology, I think you're way ahead of me in terms of potential understanding thereof. I come from, a number of areas, but the one comment I will make that's quite interesting is the Roman Flavian era, which was the Romans that came in that actually stormed Masada, which was in Israel, and caught and destroyed the final resistance of the then Israelites. That was related to the destruction of the temple, that era that you refer to. And there is a lot of people that will need to revisit religious events that are meaningful to a certain group of people. And it's not unironic that you are seeing a potential, what will be described as a weather pattern, maybe truly, maybe falsely, I don't know, but coinciding with a seminal event that was just post after death in that era, 60 to 80 after death, AD. So that was a very seminal era for other symbolic reasons, just from study of history. Going back to my overall comment on this is that if you take all the details that are coming out, I don't believe in excessive amounts of coincidences. So if you look at Rockefeller, Bill Gates, a bunch of other people, even Boris Johnson that's recently stood down in the UK, his father, a variety of other people, World Economic Forum people, there's a common strand of eugenicism and an inherent assessment that there's too many people on the planet. In other words, there's also talk of useless eaters coming out of Kissinger. Some of this is strongly denied. I consider it's not true until it's been officially denied. So the fact that it needed to be denied probably means that it was said. You take that. You take something that's seemingly unrelated, but is a consultant to the military-industrial complex, such as the Deagle statistics, that, as your audience is going to be predominantly US, we have also a strong US audience, predicts the better part of 67% decimation, a sub 100 million. You're talking about an 80, 90 million number in a country that currently holds in excess of 300 million people. That is bad odds of survival. You look at the UK and they're almost at 90% decimation on what is a small, quite densely packed island. In terms of that. So how do you, as a consultant to the military-industrial complex that happens to be targeting out to the year 2025, that's a very interesting year, and I'll refer back to that. I'll just leave that thread open for now. That there's going to be such Western decimations in the provision of this particular weaponry. So you have, as a consequence of this, statistics which are pointing to particularly a Western Anglo-Saxon English-speaking. So I'd describe it as the legacy Commonwealth and North America. So that's and Europe. So you're talking about Europe specifically. You're talking about the UK through New Zealand, Australia, and then you're talking Canada and America. They are probably the worst hit zonally, and this represents the mass middle class. And you come to a conclusion that we're actually all pawns in an ideology that is being played out over here. There's too many coincidences. There's too many things that actually have quite a foreboding eminence. So there is a real parasitic and a real attack vector that is specific to certain people. And you should ignore these things at your peril. Because the rumbling in the waters, as they say, there's something worrying me in the water, should not be ignored. The instinct, too many coincidences. I can list many more. Some of them will drop into the forefront of my mind. So the point then goes, okay, I've made everybody nervous by this fact. Well, if the Viking longboats are showing up on the shore, don't stand on your, be on your knees praying. And I'm aware many people will be religious. It's far more useful. One of the most useful religious sayings is God helps those who help themselves. Get digging your trenches, get digging your defenses, get planning, get organizing. And this gives you a raison d'etre, as the French say, a motive of existence. This will see you become leaders. Many people that have been idle all their life, if they can suddenly conceptually grasp this, you will find meaning in your life. There is good that comes out of evil in many systems. So recognize the challenge, respond to the challenge, and get organized, and recognize also that they have unbelievable resources, and never underestimate your enemy. I'm in a group of people that often say, oh, but they'll never pull that off. We won't go for it. They'll never pull that. We'll vote them out. You will not vote yourself freedom, my friends. They control those systems. It's not just the financial. I come from the financial, the technical, the charting side. I intend to build wealth with their system that they've created, but at the same time to disengage from it in the long run with legacy money, which is not currency, but gold and silver, but also defend it and defend and build community. So this is the resets. This is the reset of our logo. We have the market sniper where we follow truth, which is the money, not what they say, but what they do. The crypto, the role that's going to play in our future open source banking and surveillance finance era. And then the reset sniper, which is exactly where you're prepared. You've got an amazing piece of land and you've got some space. You're out of the urban environment into what's more rural. We have to continue to do that, but we have to get organized because there's robots coming. You could stumble into a Terminator set at some point as well. I don't want to be melodramatic. It's not going to happen in 1 minute, 1 week, or 1 day. We have plenty of time, but we do have to get organized.
Yeah, and that's a whole misnomer is people are trying to plan for today when we really need to step ahead and start planning for the next world. I get a lot of people right in like, how do we take our country back? How do we take this back? Well, I'm sorry, it's lost. It's not coming back in its form that you remember it in the nostalgia of your brain. We're long past that. We need to move into what's being formed in that new system and how to integrate into that, whether it be AI, whether it be a new economy, whether it be digital rationing cards to access food for those who are unprepared, whatever it is in the future, that's where you need to step into and be thinking about that. That whole thing back there, you're looking in the rearview mirror of something that you can't really bring back to life again. But you hit, when you said the worst hit, brought a thought to me here. Back to the magnetic field anomaly. So if you look at our solar system and we have the sun and then the earth will pass through the 4 gas giants in some sort of magnetic anomaly. A lot of people think it will disturb the magnetic hemispheres of our brain, and the human, the Homo sapiens sapien, will behave differently or think differently or perceive reality differently. And that's why there's so much distraction right now. So when we swing through this thing, however long the event lasts, up to it, during, and then out of it, there'll be something already pre-prepared for the mind to let you, precognition of what you're about to see or experience is built into what we're seeing with the narratives. But that aside, as just solar dynamics, as you come around, the Earth's going to come in front of the sun. There'll be the sun and all the magnetic gas giants behind us. So whatever, for those months in April of 2025 through, say, August of 2025, the Earth will be in front of the sun by itself. Nothing, not even AC. Mercury will be behind us. There will be nothing in the entire solar system except all the magnetic giants and the sun tugging everything that could possibly come in terms of space debris right into the face of the planet for about 6 months in 2025. April, it begins. And when you said worst hit, it kind of reminded me of that.
I'm fascinated by your very interesting, and I take it as well-researched science. And I'm interested that it also has 2025 as a year date. It is the end of the Aquarius age. Just by the by, as an interesting point, I can find actually this very page and I'll show it to you. But the Aquarius, in terms of Masonic and many of the things that are very, very tied to the zodiac, I'm not a guy who goes and decides what day he's going to have because of what somebody who reads my cards does at all. I think you are the master of your own destiny. But to a lot of people, these areas are certainly very significant. I'll just show you this diagram. Some who are familiar with the zodiac will have seen it many, many times. That talks about the eras. We're at the Aquarius is that one there. It's the second last one. That I'm on this finger, the one with the watch hand is showing. It ends in 2025. Just to give you what a big, these cycles for the people who are pulling the strings and how they might orchestrate any set of events that may be sold to us as what you've described or might actually be occurring. I don't know. I can't venture a view. I'm not skilled in that area. But the Aquarius is symbolized by the woman tipping out the vase. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, and the water pouring out, the zodiac symbol. Prior to that, there is a concept of being fishers of men. Now, many people think this is a Christian phase that was Jesus setting up Peter, his favorite disciple. In fact, that phraseology existed long before Christianity. You've got to remember that 2000 or 2023 years ago is not very long ago at all. And in fact, Plato used that very phrase. There's also phrases of fisherman, fisher king that were used Greek, Aramaic before this. Plato used this very phrase 500 years before BC, and it's written, and we've seen these writings. So it's my assessment that religions of the world have actually been regularly cobbled together. The narratives have been cobbled together and repurposed. There are a lot of people that say it's just a process, it's revelation, those that are pure just need to pray and they will be saved. This is very much encourages pacifism. In other words, some divine intervention of a chariot coming out of the sky to save you, or a force that will come planetary somewhere or something. And that encourages pacifism. We've been sold multi-generational, many rituals that is based on Abyssinian, pagan, Babylonic, various other things. It's the Christian faith is cobbled together with a pagan ceremony, with kissing under mistletoe, none of which is any real biblical reference at all, and handing over presents. It wasn't the agreed birth date at all, etc., etc. So we are looking at a lot of narratives that are being purposed. The three Abrahamic religions have a very, very interesting source and commonalities that have been written in of messiahs returning, and they have different takes on their roles. So I would say that it's about the powers that are orchestrating a cyclical agenda for which they have a degree of occultic mysticism, and you can almost call it magic with the K. That was Aleister Crowley type, and all the predecessors that gave that skills to them. And going back to the Aquarius, the fishers of men are selecting the fish. Those are to be the illuminated and be left behind. So they have a process where they choose who is to be part. They canvass at Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, etc. And the pouring out of the vase, the end of that is actually the disposal of everything else that was not fished out. And that ties again into the symbolism of an overpopulation being deeply culled. And it also has the 2025 end of year date. So there's a fascinating correlation with 2025. And by the way, I'm not one of these guys that said, "Oh my goodness, what was it, the Aztecs, or was it the world was supposed to end on the Mayan calendar, or thought all the planes were going to fall out of the sky on 1999 turning 2000 at all." I'm not a part of any doomsday cult, but I am noticing coincidences specifically with this, and I am seeing the world shifting in a manner that is appearing to be sympathetic by the orchestrators that are pulling the string. So we probably have 18 months of preparation before we're at the doorstep of 2025. And I think we have to have shown a lot for our labor and time, and every day matters and every day counts for your children, for your families, and preaching and your community building. So those would be some things that I would see. I don't see the debt system surviving much longer. So just on the technical side, we've had a 40-year bull market in bonds. To understand financial markets, just how the economics has to end, and this is going to be slightly more economic discussion, we've had a 40-year boom in bonds. In other words, debt markets. Now, debt and money, not everybody is economic. So money is borrowed into existence. If I take a loan to buy a car, it's not somebody else's savings. You're encouraged to think that. It's not true. They are continuing to proliferate. A bank is an intermediary with a central bank that actually has a license to create money out of thin air that I can go purchase something. In other words, they are trading in credits in a computer binary system that I now owe, and they then attach an usury extraction mechanism, which is the interest rate, that sees me actually have to generate more credits to pay for the fact that I wanted to consume today, and someone else, the bank, has created this money. So there's a reward system, which is the interest rate environment. We've continued to see since Faulkner, who was the head of the Fed in the 80s, which was the last time the gold truly had a reasonable run, and silver was $50 back then, and it was a different dollar that bought you a whole bunch more than it is today. Let's just reiterate. Silver and gold had their huge run of the 80s. Since then, we've been in a technical decline. The events of March 2020, this is the story nobody talks about. Everybody understood the dot-com boom. Everybody understood the dot-com boom. Very few people understood that we actually had another bank bailout in March 2020, and you had a blow-off in valuations of debt. So I am getting up the debt chart while I'm speaking to you. The blow-off in the valuations of debt is when such a low interest rate was being paid for being an owner of a debt instrument. And don't forget, the money is devaluing at the accepted inflation rate. So I'm going to just share a small chart just to make this a little bit visual for everybody so that they can understand cycles. We have had a 40-year period of devaluation in inflationary devaluation. So since the 80s, this is the United States 30-year yield. The interest rates have just gone down, 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 and down. And this is a log scale chart, so it's percentage rather than absolute value. I want to truly highlight, when you get to very low rates, the percentage moves. If you go from 0.5 to 1, it's only 0.5, but it's actually a doubling in the rates. So I want everybody to appreciate that, and that's why we have it as a percentage rate. I'm just looking for my tool here. Sorry, 1 second.
Can I ask you a quick question about that?
Sure.
Yeah, because wasn't it in October of 2019, again, they came up with the overnight repo rate crisis where they were dumping something like 700 to 800 billion per evening in there to try to continue that market, propping up with they had the same problems prior to the financial crisis happening. So it seems like it was a 2.0, and then suddenly this excuse came up with never-ending money printing, so nobody would blink an eye, but then we know what happened in 2020. So I'm just wondering if those two are related somehow, where
100%. You're far better informed for someone who's expert in climatology than most people. In fact, it was September into October of 19, there was a complete lockup of the interbank lending market. So the banks again feared that there would be, they didn't trust each other. They all considered everyone else potentially bankrupt and didn't want to lend overnight to somebody else and be paid a rate by that bank. So they all kept their own money and said, don't lend to him. He's not good for it. He's not good for it, etc. And the Federal Reserve had to say, no, everybody's fine. And they can have this big fat discount window where they can come and get as much money as they want. We'll provide it. You can lend to anyone. They back by us, essentially, and stood behind the banking system. Unbeknownst to many Americans, I expect, because there was only one article, I think, on Zero Hedge, and then there was one other blog site that highlighted this, and that got truly suppressed, was that just under 4 trillion was sent to Nomura. So you're talking about 3.89, I think it was. Call me a liar if it was 3.69 trillion. Credit Suisse, UBS, these are European and Japanese banks where US central bank is providing not billions, but absolute trillions, not 1 trillion, but multiple trillions. Of course, the usual culprits of JP Morgan, Bank of America, were also in the mix, receiving trillions as well in this window. And this got hidden, and everybody said, oh, it was a banker bailout. It was banks in 2008 when they received hundreds of billions. And yet they brought this mass distraction and this draconian socio-political begin the training of taking away freedom of movement. And at the same time, this huge bailout happened that dwarfed everything of 08 to 09. And such was that you had the debt markets yield collapse to very close to zero. Now, they have an inverse relationship. When they have a very low yield, they have a very high value. And the question becomes, so the valuation is where the blue line is. The bond was the best investment because the stock market crashed, Bitcoin crashed, gold crashed, everybody crashed, everyone ran into debt instruments. The federal bank standing behind it, they're not federal, they're not a reserve, but the central bank of this America, as we call it, the Fed, And as a result, government debt was the best game in town. And as a result, people bought in, and the yield was practically nothing. Don't forget, we have a really significant inflation even then, which has only got worse since. They then created 6 or 7 trillion that went into the economy, but that didn't all go to the people. So this was a key turn for us in bond markets. Now, bond markets rule all other markets. Most people eyes glaze over because you're taught not to care about bond markets. Everybody understands Microsoft, Coca-Cola, etc. Equity markets. Bond markets is significantly bigger, and it is the dark side of the moon that is money that has been borrowed into existence. There's a liability, and then there's the cash you spend. If you take a personal loan and you go buy a car, that's the positive side. It's an item. You have a hire purchase agreement. You know, you're paying it off over 7, 8 years, and you're only buying 60% of it, and you don't even know what you paid for the thing. You just know that your payment's affordable. You've been put into a shotgun tertiary extracting on the wrong side of a compound interest equation in a depreciating asset. That's right where they want you. Consuming, depreciating, overvalued assets with an tertiary extraction. Now, as the debt market has reversed, the March 2020 events to us represent a major reversal, a 40-year Volcker, who preceded Greenspan, all the way through reversal. So what is now happening, and I'm going to just to highlight my hypothesis, that is a bookend event for the great debt boom. Buying bonds on every dip in valuation was the best trade. It's a meme, and for 40 years it served you. That is over. And I will highlight something else that is typical of that, and highlights the keenest significance of the March 2020 events, David. And that is the gold versus silver ratio. Gold and silver
it went up to like about 120. That was unheard of. Usually the ratio in nature is around 1 to 15. So to see something at that level, back the truck up.
It was extreme. And as a reminder to those who are less well up to date with those stats as yourself, here you can see coinciding with those same events is the gold-silver ratio and what happened in its shootout there. And if I just de-log it, you can see what a big move it was. This was the blow-off. So coinciding when debt reached its absolute nadir of blow-off valuation, gold and silver in its relative valuation, which is, remember, the gold-silver ratio, for those that are new, you want the gold-silver ratio to be going down for gold and silver to be going up. When it's very low, it represents high valuation of gold and silver. When it's very high, it means that real money is most underappreciated that it's ever been before. And you had a blow-off high here. You can see on this chart, if I just hold it over that blow-off high, that is currently, the high was 128.69. We've never done that before. To be clear, mining wise, you speak to the top miners, and again, good American citizens, for example, First Majestic, many might know that if they're into silver and gold, a miner in the States that has holdings in a number of places, having a problem with their Jared Canyon mine, but they will tell you, we get on average 8 ounces for every single ounce of gold that we pull out the ground. So silver mines are exceedingly rare because people, it's so low the price in silver that it's generally, unless you're getting an absolute unbelievable vein, it's not economically viable. Silver is generally being brought to the surface as a byproduct. The copper and other things are the primary product. And while we're down here and we've already spent all the money for breaking all the rocks and being half a mile under the ground, there's this other thing lying around. It's kind of useful. Take it while we're down there. That's silver. It's non-viable in many instances for unique specific. There's only a handful of really specific silver mine only deposit mines. So I want to just highlight that. It comes out where someone's already done all the work and put in all the expenditure for some other reason, and you had 128. So that was the turn in the great underappreciation of precious metals generally, and of silver particularly. And since then, it's our express opinion that you're in a massive head and shoulders. So I put a whole bunch of lines in here. It's a very busy chart. It will confuse a lot of people that aren't into charting, but a head and shoulders is a very simple pattern, and patterns have a habit of reforming where you get a blow-off event. So you should be thinking, this is the dot-com boom that no one spoke about, the gold-silver ratio and the debt markets that occurred, that once you've had such an extremity, it's very typical in price behavior that you move aggressively in the other way. When you had a blow-off in dot-com shares, you ended up having a major crash subsequently. And a blow-off is when you have very high volatility, extreme moves in a very short time. The final people can't bear not to be in and hearing about their friends who've made 5 times their money on boo.com or pets.com, or maybe one of the survivors like Amazon, etc. And then it ends. The dumb money enters and then it ends. And this was the dumb money entering into the debt markets and ignoring and dissing and disrespecting the real legacy money that actually isn't for 3,000 or 5,000 years. I just interviewed Michael Tellinger, who's in Southern Africa and Zimbabwe, and says before organized agriculture, people in Southern Africa were mining gold. So they had rocks and worship and interesting rituals and all sorts of things, and they would not yet have the wheel. They did not yet have organized agriculture for food, but they were mining and electing to collect gold. So gold has a mystique. Even in these Masonic books that I've shown you, this particular work that I'm working through in the Seeding of Religions, it's a gentleman by the name of Alan Watt, Piercing the Veil. And unfortunately he's passed on, but you'll see in Masonry and all the dictums, alchemy is regularly referred to, which is base metals into gold. Gold, there is a great significance to gold as a seminal resource. It is unique, it will never rot, it will never change, it can't be QE'd out and made smaller each time you look at it each day. So I personally am suggesting for wealth retention, people absolutely exploit precious metals, particularly gold and silver, a combination of both. Although I expect silver, when it runs, will run further for longer and higher, it is also more volatile. So you need to have, and you can't also, if the big amounts, it's difficult to store if you have, millions of dollars in silver. So you want to have a mix and in many different formats. So I think that's our world money. And I think that this key March 2020 event not only was a social drill on containment of freedom of movement, and this is why I say you get hit, they will orchestrate many things that simultaneously strike, missiles, bombs, you name it. And you have to be prepared. It's meant to be shock and awe, as Rumsfeld described it. And you have to have prepared, which is also in your mindset, said in the event of the following things, game theory wise, how am I responding when this happens? Anything you have not thought through, planned for, and even written down, you will be in a state of high emotion and likely to make the worst response. So I teach emotional trading is the worst trading. It's chasing the pump. Those are the guys running in the top. I teach planning your goal and letting the market do whatever it's going to do with a tight stop and an expansive reward, only where those strategies are good in low volatility moments. And as a result, that's what you need to do. Trading is a microcosm of life. Everything we do is a microcosm of life. Not enough people have mentally thought through the pre-play game of the multiple of attack vectors that will befall you, and many of them will be simultaneously orchestrated to keep you in a state of absolute confusion, stimulus, fear, and lowest energy level, so that you make the typical stampeding sheep critical mistake, like lemmings off the cliff. And my goal and game in life is to tell you that that's going to happen, to get you to pre-plan for it, to think it through, and to have all the aspects that you require in your reset for surviving that attack vector. I want to get you over the other side. And the golden arch on the financial and your balance sheet and net worth, so that you can carry something over, is gold. The old rickety iron horse railway line to the new modern monorail, that is gold. You also have to personally survive as well. But in terms of the financial and economic, precious metals will be one of the most important roles. And the CBDs and the Bitcoins and of this world They are digital and they control the grid. They control the surveillance of the grid. And while I am participating in them to a degree, they will be falling under the auspices entirely of the control structure that I consider as our enemy. And anyway, that's quite a long monologue to you there. So I hope that helps. And I don't know if there's anything you want me to unpack or drill down on further.
Well, I'll throw an idea out. If you look back at your charts there of, look at Aquarius, what's the sign that you see there on the page? It looks electrical. And that's what's talked about, the frequency change during this time. Aquarius is a much faster moving energy. So you understand vibratory fields. So an old system that's heavy and iron-like can't exist in a new vibratory pattern that's moving faster. So why is it that CBDCs have suddenly come out? What is it about all these changes that we're seeing with the movement from the LIBOR over to the SOFR? Why is that all happening right now when the energies are actually literally faster and faster and faster on the daily? That symbol right there of Aquarius actually shows you it's an energetic symbol and change. Now, I like to look at star maps going back into, the 1600s. I'm a fan of maps. If I could find older maps going back into, 1500s, 1400s, I'm all over that. But one thing that you find routinely in star charts and star maps from the 1600s, 1500s, into the late 1700s, the only one area that shows from a constellation, they show sort of a river coming out of that ends up over into Pisces. That is an energetic flow. Think of it as a current through space. Now think of that current, and if you understood the cycle of amplification and then lower voltage charge or increasing voltage charge, and how that would affect not only the planet, but the people or the species on the planet. Now, why is all this happening in conjunction right now is more the question. And, the LIBOR SOFR conversion, how much is that going to upset the interest market, the debt market, any contracts written? How do you take those contracts that were previously written on the LIBOR rates and then move them over to the SOFR rates if there's some sort of backstop and there's an arbitrage of 0.11 on that, what they're trying to talk about in some of these charts that I've seen? Like, how many trillions of dollars is going to be lost? Because it was at 600 trillion is over that needs to be converted through the system. Or even they're talking about converting 200 trillion in the next month or so. I mean, these movements of energy so fast that the Aquarian energies are all about come right back into the markets. Now, will that allow us to grow food faster? Will that allow communities to form faster? Will that, like charges where atoms slam together, speaking of gold and silver in veins, will that draw people to communities because of like mind and like charge, like thinking? Because a vibratory pattern is brought back to itself again. They attract each other. And again, the repel effect is also in play there, magnetism, if you're looking at it. So I just wondered what you thought about the LIBOR and the SOFR moving forward. And that's all at the end of this month, I do believe, at the end of June coming up. Any thoughts on that and how that might play out into the expediting of the what I would call the engineered financial crisis, which I've heard you talk about a few times?
I actually I've taken scant notice only of the conversion. I think that's a bit of a de-Londification, because LIBOR stands for the London Interbank Lending Rate, essentially. And that's kind of onboarding it back into kind of more the States and set by the Fed. You may also recall that the debt markets got unruly since the March 2020. And in fact, Britain was particularly badly hit and had a situation where they couldn't make pension payments on their assets and had a liquidity shortfall. So these are people that have paid their whole lives for a pension, that you're supposed to have had the money, and the debt markets weren't trading. No one wanted to buy the bonds, and the pension funds needed to sell bonds to make pension payroll, for want of a better phrase, the annuity payments that they've committed to contractually. and couldn't get a proper price for it because nobody wanted to buy the British debt. So we've already starting to see that. So I would say the bringing onshore of SOFR and departing from LIBOR was domesticizing the interbank lending rates a little bit and reducing the impact of the UK and London. That's part and parcel of it. Is it the manner in which they pull everything down, and will that be this mid-year that it happens? I think 2025 is the seminal year for a lot of things, but I think a lot of things will be going wrong and start going wrong well before then. In fact, we're busy witnessing that happening anyway. So interest rates, I think everyone expecting peaks and pullbacks. Whilst you may get a flat period for a while, you may even get 1 or 2 cuts. You're going to end up with higher interest rates. That's the one thing no one is preparing for. And to all those listening, the nanothermide of a controlled demolition of your personal finances is debt with an interest rate. And they can, even if some people say, well, I have a fixed contract, I have a fixed rate on my home, or whatever the case may be, they might be able to, under a force majeure situation, force you into a variable rate. You don't know. Unfortunately, there's a big difference between morality and legality. And these guys have gone into great degrees of revisiting terms and conditions. For example, bail-ins, bailouts, these things have been written in contractually. They've changed since the Cyprus events that occurred, where they actually gave everybody huge haircuts and you became minor subsistence shareholders in the banks that are essentially bankrupt. So, you know, they have already tested solutions that they may intend to unfurl at a far greater level. Long-term capital's collapse was actually a bail-in, and that was a precursor to the 2008, which gave them the confidence to do a bigger scaled one. Your lockdowns, as per the events of March 2020, is an initial drill for further lockdowns. These are powers that they intend to exercise. Otherwise, they'd lose them. They're not powers that they just go, that's it, I don't see us ever using that again, and we wouldn't want to. No, as people seize power, the power to remove you from being on the roads that they also occasionally need to use, out of the airways that they need to use, that is something they will exercise more regularly, like a muscle. Otherwise, it wastes away. So overall, freedom of movement is going to come under attack. You need to choose where you're going to make your stand. You need to be surrounded by the right quality of people. You need to be a localized leader. You need to be inspiring people and taking action. Our community is motivated and specific towards that, as the Reset Sniper being a large and ever-growing element of what we do. However, we still need to be able to participate. You talk about electrical, you asked for a comment actually on the Aquarius symbol. Some of these are hieroglyphics. So you'll see, for example, Omega in some of them, and various other Greek and Aramaic symbols. It could also have a dual meaning of electrical. I see we're all too relevantly exposed to grid down, and I see South Africa as a great example of how that hurts and bites when you have grid down. But if they take grid down or EMS attacks that many people have speculated on, almost all your forms of communication are gone. Your ability to withdraw money from banks are gone, from ATMs, from internet banking. Your ability to make payments are gone. You get rug pulled on every key element. Shops will not be able to receive payments. So actually having some cash, even though it's being devalued, is still a worthwhile endeavor in my overall opinion and view. And you have to protect against this kind of a strike. I would also argue ham radio and CB radio are worthwhile in the event of grid down. By the way, in 7/7 in London, which was their 9/11, on the tube attacks and the surprising bus attack just outside, I dare say that Tavistock Institute, for those that know what I'm referring to, go research Tavistock further. They actually took the mobile network down for all of the UK, and they have kill switches to do that. So when you most need things is when they will not be available. And that's when having silver ounces, gold, ham radio, CB radio, and Even radio networks and towers can be knocked out. It's not going to be foolproof, but it'll be an extra option. They might come up more. And then when they do come on, you will have state broadcasting television that will be forming the narrative, which will almost invariably be the framing of the lie, or provoking you into a certain course of action, usually fear. So TV's main product is fear marketing. And coercion and mental manipulation. So as I say, you don't want to be relying on that. So you want a news network, you want to be networked on groups with people globally and certainly nationally in the States, so that different bits of information can flow. And they will want to cut those links so that you are as uninformed about what's going down as is possible, and as confused. And you've got to do everything to resist that. And those are the preparations I feel people should make. And long-term food stocking, piling, and growing, localized aquaponics, home gardening, all of these things are going to be very, very important. Having your own land and maybe also the vehicle inside which you own that land. You've got to remember, you need to use their weapons against them too. It's no coincidence that Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, all run foundations. Rockefeller Foundation, probably one of the original. These are how they protect their assets that they should be done. You can do it too. Your property should be owned in it, not individually. Death taxes, all sorts of things. You get more protection. We actually specialize in that for community members, and many of them American, and have made use of structures that we've helped set up. So there's the legalese. How are you structured? How are you set up for basic resources? How are you networked? And how exposed, and where are all the points of failure of those things given different scenarios? That's the game theory. We've been given 18 months to game theory for everything that can come our way. We're still going to miss some things, but you're going to be eminently more prepared anyway. I would even say there's scope for underground things. I think some of the things that could be passed as the climatology, and that's not to say the climatology that you've presented won't happen and isn't accurate, quite possible. But some of those effects could be achieved by 5G, 6G towers possibly, and some of the things that may have befallen us in terms of what was injected in our system. There's some people speculating on that. Again, I'm not a dynamics specialist. We can only guess, but there is something going on, and I don't feel these tighter wavelengths that are being proliferated around schools, urban environments, when we know the science has shown it has bad effects. These are not actions that are taken in the citizens' favor. These are actions that are being taken contrary to their own scientific evidence. Why would they do them? Because a higher goal is being served in terms of their agenda, not yours. And we are at war, but we are not at war with Russia. We're not at war. People have too much of a nation-state framing. There is a transnational parasite that is inside all our countries, and it's going to be very hard to run away to one nation-state that isn't, to some degree, permeated in the head by this. And they are going to attempt to trickle down all forms of agendas on us. And it is a part and parcel of a thinning of the population, in my opinion. And I want to carry as many people into survival. And there is scope for having subterranean developments. It sounds like the good old nuclear fallout thing, but having home underground. There's evidence that there's full networks of cave and tunnel developments. Many think under the Getty's Museum, many think under Denver Airport, just to talk some American examples, clearly under the White House and between airports. There are lots of whistleblowers that have given indications of this. So they could actually retreat subterraneously, and the rest of us could be exposed to something quite hazardous that could take many forms, that could be sold as a climate event. Or could actually be a climate event. I don't know. And I think it's our duty to prepare to survive that. And 2025 is going to be a year of reckoning.
Could I throw a last question at you?
Sure.
Well, just a quick statement. You know, that statism thing is the biggest lie and the biggest fiction sold to us over the thousands of years that there are countries. You know, this usurps anything with central banking, statism. That's the base of it all. If there was not that, we have this nation, you have that nation. If it was humanity is itself without borders, that would be something completely different. But that world that would exist there is be different from now. But this, I want to talk about the Southern Hemisphere with the ozone depletion event, because I really believe that the data is showing that you would be familiar with this because you're from South Africa and you understand the ozone hole cycle every single year, as well as people from Australia. I'm going to take you back to the Hunga Tonga eruption. Does everybody remember that? The Tonga eruption that blew up, and it was a big news story for a while. They had the pictures from the International Space Station. That was January 15th of last year.
I remember how vivid there was tweets. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great pictures, just astounding. Well, this was a water vapor eruption, and it's very different from a land-based eruption that would shoot up ash and volcanic particles, sulfur dioxide, etc. This water vapor was shot up some 180,000 feet into our atmosphere, and it layered and landed in one layer of our atmosphere called the mesosphere. Now, the amount of ice crystals that are pushed up in there now are something like tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of times more than the averages that have been measured. Now, normally it's only, meteorites that come in will leave dust trails, rocket launches going out that will leave dust trails. There's really not too much that'll put ice crystals or crystal formation into that. They call it a desert layer anyway, because it's so high up, evaporation doesn't take moisture up there. It's one of these punch through events. So you have to realize tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of times more ice crystals than normal. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because that's where ozone breaks down. And the O3 molecule, 3 oxygen atoms snap together. Once it finds an ice crystal surface, either chlorine or bromine will come along and say, hey, I want one of those. And they'll strip it off, and you'll get regular oxygen, and you'll have a chlorine oxide or a bromine oxide molecule that'll then go back down through the atmosphere and start its life cycle again. The thing about this is the runaway ozone depletion that's going to, and already is onsetting. That's why I sent you that one graphic there. That is of today. And it's been like this for at least the last 3 months. Now, the ozone hole really shouldn't onset until what? When do you think the deepest time is, when they're like, put on the sunscreen, you're going to fry outside? This also affects agriculture. It decreases agricultural yields across most plant species by about 30%. And at the higher elevations you get, which barley would be one of the first affected, is somewhere around 40%. So if you just take an overall look and say, all right, all of the Southern Hemisphere's agriculture production is going to be reduced 20, I'll just say 20 instead of 30, 20%. Like, how is that going to kick off price-wise? Because it's this ice crystal, they're not going to come down for the next 1 or 2 years. It'll be about a 3-year event, and then we'll get the same exact pattern next year. The early onset of the ozone, the longer than usual, tapering out of that until the column refills itself. But plant life is going to be affected, along with insect life, sea life. Humans ourselves are going to be a lot more UVB radiation striking the ground during this time. So how's the news going to run with that as a fear event? And then what do you think about if you lose 20% of the Southern Hemisphere crop production, then how's that going to push across the planet in terms of upsetting economies and taking us even into higher food prices? And I guess that's my real question I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, so there's quite a bit in that overall statement. Again, you're ahead of me on climatology, but I would argue the one thing in terms of the Southern Hemisphere, I would imagine that the powers that be, that they were orchestrating expected food shortfalls, would coincidentally make that also sure that anything natural is also working. They ride the trend of any natural trends that may exist. So they will get the double benefit. There is the weaponization of climate, what I refer to as the watermelon communism, which is essentially bringing in complete Bolshevik communistic rule, particularly to where there's strong middle classes, which is the areas I've already described, typically English language nations and Europe, where so that is the sticker story for many farm purchases and everything. So they're going to resiliently and belligerently, whether it's shown to be a lie or not. Remember, outrage at their lies just further serves their agenda. So they work on a basis of thesis, antithesis, and they get their synthesis, which is the two warring factions. So they are very successful. at establishing one argument, which is intentionally outrageous, and one, outcome that gets a counter argument, and then dividing and getting this war around this issue and actually synthesizing what they want out of that, which ends up a hybridization of both. You could argue this happened with communism in the USSR and capitalism, and we've now gone more welfare state. So democracy is fast passing into socialism, slave reparations, UBI, CBDCs on the capitalist side, and the old USSR Russian states, now, they've got big corporations, there's private business, you're owning property, and you get this quasi-corporate fascism where big businesses can sell and do things, small businesses are largely eliminated, and then communism for the serfs, where people on very low wages doing very menial things. So there's many examples of thesis and antithesis. So in terms of the inflation, their goal right now is all aspects that you have to expend upon need to go up in price. So if you want to devalue everybody's wealth, one of the things you do is you destroy their currency. Remember, the debt collapse is the destruction of your currency, because every dollar is borrowed into existence, T-bill accounting, asset liability. So that your pension is getting destroyed at the same time, because your pensions, not if you've taken control over your own pension and you've invested it in something else like gold and silver, but most pensions in Europe and also in America hold bonds, because that interest payment is the annuity they pay out every month to you. So they hold the bond, they get a government interest payment, and then they just dish that out as, break it up and send it to all the people in their pension payments. So the collapse of the currency will coincide with the death of debt, because they are one and the same. It's just the dark side of the moon and the bright side. If you kill the dark side, you've killed the moon. So both go down. So your pensions get destroyed at the same time as your buying power is getting destroyed. That's a very effective when you want to push everybody to serfdom in terms of destroying their wealth. But what about the house that they own? Well, the debt, because it's being destroyed, you force the interest rate out. So everyone who has a loan can't afford their loan. Even if they have fixed, as I've said, there's ways around it. You might have to refinance, or they might just force majeure you into a variable rate, whatever the case may be. Then those that have survived, that are the minimum, prices will rise so high on things like food stuff, and inflation will remain vigilant. Part of that interest rate spike. So instead of a turning, you might get one little, as I say, a minor pullback before you have a blow off in interest rates. This could actually see the dollar milkshake theory spike initially and destroy other European nation currencies and others through a super aggressive move, which then says we can't have this. We need a new world order, a financial system. So that will precipitate the great instability in the forex markets and give them their excuse for saying it's time we did the reason this happened. They'll frame the reason, and then they'll come with a ready-bake, oven-ready solution. But inflation will, on the basics, so once you start pushing inflation on the basics, you now create social unrest, because it's one thing not being able to afford a brand new truck. You keep driving the old one. By the way, average age on cars in Americans never been higher. Something that's not being discussed. I think it's 12.5 years. So people are holding on to their cars for longer, which tells you. But anyway, but when you can't buy your food, your breakfast, your eggs, your daily, that's when you really, really have problems. And it was very interesting that the Arabian Spring ran all the way across and occurred when the cost of food was then just, people were going hungry. That's what gets people in the streets. And that's when you want social unrest. And that's when people steal from others on the basis of needing to survive. And that's how they get rats to kill each other without having to do that. The crabs in the bucket are clawing each other back. And you want to avoid being that. And that's where your fellow citizen becomes your fellow, either he's part of your community or he becomes a future problem. The sleepers are a problem, because when they can't eat, they're going to come storming the nearest gate to beg and borrow for stuff. You need to be able to protect what you have in an environment where so many will not have and haven't prepared. That's why the more you get preparing, not only are you getting more friends on your team, you're reducing people who will be underprepared, that'll be kicking your door down. And these are the aspects. So the food price inflation that's likely to come in as a result of some of the things you mentioned and what we've discussed is all part of destroying and making reliant on state, which is the ultimate global communism that I feel is coming. And it's the West that needs it. The rest of the world will get it to a lesser degree. Many of them have already experienced that. Eastern Europeans, Russia has already experienced it. China's already a communistic state. Latin America has bounced up and down. The places to hide for me, actually, and this is going to be hard for many Americans to hear, but I feel in spite of all your plans, you will find that they will be far more effective than you realize, because they are also game theorying for these things, and they have Aladdin, the supercomputer, and lots of other tools. It could be wise for you to have alternative geographic options outside of that jurisdiction that is the United States of America entirely, which can actually see places like Latin America where you think, well, you don't get the same service standards, this isn't as good, actually turn out for this event being a much better and safer outcome. I will actually, ironically, consider South Africa quite a well-prepared place. And that's, many people are going to go, what to that comment? Because all the people that are of a certain income standard have generators, have batteries, have everything. It's a must-have because their primary status provider is in a state of decline. It's happened in slow motion. They've had more time to prepare. People know how to set up alternators. They don't care that there's 12 hours load shedding if they're fully prepared. It's devastating for businesses that have to have power and can't fathomably have enough battery power. So yes, they've felt that in the economy. But the thing, when the cards fall slower, you can see what's happening and people can react. If they happen suddenly, you'll go from having grid and you thought, oh, I'll have time, there'll be warnings, and then suddenly no grid. There are places that it's a farming country. There's lots of farms. Farmers are everywhere. There's lots of different crops. It was almost independent on almost every level except oil. They even crushed coal for oil quite effectively because of apartheid. So they were a sanctioned nation state. So they developed multiple industries that are local. So in some ways, there's some advantage. And there's chaos. The government's not efficient, that efficient, as opposed to, say, Germany, where they're exceedingly efficient. They know where you are. They know if you've changed the address. They're asking immediately for tax here, tax there. So being lost in the cracks in the many would consider first world, third world, can actually have some advantages. These are options that you will have. Is there a perfect safe haven? I'd love to give you $1 million answer that there absolutely is, but I don't consider it to be so. But you could find Uruguay in Latin America. You could find Singapore, very draconian government. They did an awful lockdown on people, but rule of law probably likely to maintain on financial sides and asset sides. So you might want your financials and assets a little bit in there. You might want to actually physically be somewhere else. You might want banks that are a third jurisdiction. This takes you into the 5 flags. And as I say, this is what our community at the Market Sniper is about. Building wealth and protecting wealth in a very unique economic period where all the usual rules will be inverted and no longer apply. You do not buy bonds. You do not buy a portfolio of bonds. Debt is over. It is over. And there will be a cataclysmic event. It's taken 40 years. I showed the yield were dropping. But the one thing about when markets fall is they grind up for years in valuation. But when they collapse at a totally different rate. That's why shorters make so much money in such a short time, if they get it right. They're often wrong because mostly things trend up because of an inflation and a low level of inherent inflation generally. But when things go down, so we aren't going to get a 40 years calm down cycle here. This is going to accelerate, get disorderly, and then there's going to be a circuit breaker stop, and then they're going to switch on the lights to a whole new system. It will be over far faster. The unwinding of a 40-year bond bull market will be far, far quicker. And there will be a point where it's just earthquake, it's done. And then you're on the other side, it's a different world. And that you have to survive that event. And counterparty risk is going to be huge. Even if you shorted perfectly as a trader, the bank could go bust that does it. All trades could be nullified or restated. So I don't overemphasize that. That's why I want to hold physical and silver gold. The difference with that is they have to send someone with a gun or a robot with a gun to take it off you. What might they do before? They might ask for registration of all your holdings. Do you have any of this? They might make it mandatory. If you don't declare, it's deemed confiscatable. They'll use threats. They'll do many things. And you're going to have to determine in advance. And as I say, always be honest in a moral sense to moral people. But in an amoral or immoral system, you're going to have to decide. There's a massive difference between morality and their specially written up laws, legality. And you're going to have to decide how you're going to protect yourself and family. And your loyalty should be not to state, not to country, not to this ruling class crowd that will do anything they can to strip you of your assets. You are at war with them. Do not be in Stockholm syndrome to your captor. Your local community and your family and yourself are your priorities. And this notion of patriotism and nation state should be abandoned because it is a captured state. And that is my closing message. And people can follow us on YouTube, on the Market Sniper, and on the crypto side. On the crypto sniper, there'll be opportunities still to make money, both on the downside and the upside. It's incredibly interesting times, and it's a challenge, and leaders stand up. So take action. Don't be intimidated by the situation. There's been worse things that have happened, I'm sure. We haven't lived all of the last 250,000 years. We've had a good life so far, and we're going to have many awesome more days. Taking action is real mental health. Reject the psyop, turn the TV off, and micro habits every day, taking you a small step forward on all the key areas where you're vulnerable. That's my position.
Well, it sounds like you need an exit strategy to cash in some of that gold and silver to pay off your house so you don't get roped into that force majeure. We've been talking with Francis Hunt here. Yeah, themarketsniper.com. I'll leave all the links in the description box below so you can have further conversations if you liked what you heard today. Francis, I appreciate you coming on. I was trying to, do a couple more roofs on the Rubik's Cube myself here to figure it out. Because like I said, we're all in this together. So I'm just trying to throw my tiny section of natural events on how elite are going to try to run on top of that to get an outcome of some sort to push more control. So I do appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And good luck to everybody. Work hard, be focused, be positive, enjoy the challenge. It's an obstacle course. You've been given an obstacle course. You can either fall at the start line and weep, or you can work as a team and help each other over, and you're going to feel awesome on completing it. And life is a challenge, and it's what you achieve. Stand up, be leaders. It's awesome. In a weird way, it's also awesome, but it's going to be a lot of tragedy, a lot of pain in it. But you're chosen to live these times because you can handle it. Go and get busy. That's it. And check us out if you like what we say. Free YouTube, book a call, have a chat, anything you like. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, David.
Bye for now.
Bye.